grade 11s. Today we are going to have a look at homeostasis and the endocrine system. We're going to look at all of the hormones and all of the negative feedback associated with that. Right, let's get started. So right from the start, we first just need to have a look at what is a gland. So there are two types. There's an endocrine and an exocrine gland, and we organize them based on where the hormone is going. Right, so an endocrine gland is a gland that releases the hormones directly into a bloodstream. There is no duct. So the gland from this picture, you can see there's the gland, the blue part, there's the bloodstream, and the hormone will go directly from this gland into the bloodstream to reach a target organ. Right, so I always tell my kids there's a D in the word, it goes directly into the bloodstream. Whereas an exocrine gland, in this case there are ducts, so it has to go through a duct to be able to reach the target organ. So there's the gland, and in this case the hormone needs to go through that little duct. It doesn't go through your bloodstream to reach the target organ. So an example of this type of gland would be your salivary glands. So they secrete the saliva through a duct, and that will then reach your mouth. So just quickly looking at what are hormones. Hormones are the things, the little proteins that are released by your endocrine system. So hormones are an organic compound, and they act as chemical messengers. In last week's lesson, we had a look of the nervous system, and there the messengers were neurons. They weren't chemical messengers, they were electrical messengers. And this week, looking at the endocrine system, we are dealing with chemical messengers, and they are proteins. They are secreted by these endocrine glands. It has to go into your bloodstream to reach a target organ, and that function that they sort of have on the target organ could be stimulating, or it could be inhibiting. That might be a new word for you. Inhibiting means it stops or it limits the amount of hormone. It basically just stops or reduces the amount of secretions that will...
So it's like a petrol and a brake on a car. So stimulating will be when I'm pressing the petrol, so I'm increasing whatever is being done. So for instance, if I have metabolic rate, if I increase the hormone thyroxine, then there will be an increase in the metabolic rate.
Yes.
If I'm inhibiting the hormone thyroxine, then I'm pressing the brake, so that will then decrease the metabolic rate. But remember, inhibiting does not mean to stop completely. So the car's never going to come to a full stop. It's just going to decrease the speed dramatically. So it's always to do with the amount of speed that is either increasing or decreasing.
Yes, and we'll look at a few examples of these functions. Right, so just to show you here a picture, there we have the gland, an endocrine gland, releasing these purple bubbles, which will be the hormones, directly into the bloodstream. So therefore it's an endocrine gland and not an exocrine gland. There goes the hormone all the way there, trying to reach a target organ, but that little purple bubble doesn't fit on the receptor of this target cell. So therefore it won't inhibit or activate the response there. And there we can see that it matches the receptor on this target cell, so therefore it will cause an effect on that target cell. Right, now looking at all of our glands and all of the hormones.
Okay, so like remember that a system comprises out of different sections. For instance, if we think of the cardiovascular system, it contains the heart with the blood vessel. So the endocrine system have various different endocrine glands that secretes different hormones that then will act on different target organs. And hormones and their target organ is very specific. So I won't have any hormone activating any target organ. So therefore we call the hormone and the target organ is almost like a key and a lock. They have to fit together to be able to have a response. Okay, so I call it the main control center of the endocrine system is the hypothalamus. Just below it we have the hypophysis. So the hypothalamus regulates the homeostasis of the body, and it produces a hormone ADH, but it is stored in the hypophysis, which is then the master gland of the body. ADH controls the target organ of ADH, which stands for antidiuretic hormone. Okay, there's that one. You may use that abbreviation ADH. The target organ of ADH is the kidneys, more specifically the tubules of the kidneys. So it regulates the permeability of that tubules to allow water reabsorption. The next one we have is the pancreas, and the pancreas is actually interesting because it's both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. So its exocrine function would be to secrete enzymes for digestion, but its endocrine function is the production of glucagon, okay, which help regulate blood glucose levels, and insulin, which help regulate blood glucose levels. Then we have the adrenal gland, which is a small triangle that we find on top of the kidney, and the adrenal gland have various different hormones that it secretes, but the two that is important for you is adrenaline. That is our fight or flight hormone, and its target organ is actually the whole body. You can see that it has various different target places that it will activate. And then the other one that is secreted by the adrenal gland is aldosterone. Okay, so what is important is that you need to know the effects of adrenaline on the body. Okay, so it will, if you think of your flight or flight response, you're going to run away from the lion, so your heartbeat is going to increase, blood pressure will increase, we will have more glucose in the body so that there's more energy to burn. The blood supply to our muscles will increase, the skeletal muscle tone will increase. With that, we will have an increase in breathing rate, and our pupils will dilate. Okay, so that is so that our body can protect itself against any danger. Okay, and then obviously it will decrease the blood flow to areas that is not directly responsible for my survival, like the digestive system and the skin. Okay, and then aldosterone, the other one that is secreted by the adrenal gland, is then the hormone that is also the target organ is actually the kidney, and it regulates the salt concentration of the blood. Okay, then the testes is part of our reproductive system as well. We have looked at it there. So the testes found in males is responsible for the production of testosterone, and in reproduction we did look at the functions of testosterone, but I think the main important one is the stimulation of spermatogenesis as well as the maturation of the sperm cells, and then also it stimulates the secondary characteristics of males, the growing of a beard, large muscles, etc., that comes along with testosterone. And then in females, obviously we got the ovary, which is the counterpart of the testes, and it produces two hormones, estrogen, which stimulates puberty and the secondary female characteristics, as well as the thickening of our endometrium. So that target organ would be the uterus. And then progesterone, it promotes also the thickening of the endometrium, and it maintains the endometrium during pregnancy, so it allows for the pregnancy to run its full course of 40 weeks. Okay, then the thyroid gland. I always say it looks like a little butterfly. If you touch your throat, you will most probably touch your thyroid gland, and that is responsible for the production of thyroxine. So thyroxine's target organ is the whole body because it controls the rate at which we burn energy, the rate at which we use energy. So our metabolic rate refers to the basal rate of, if I am at rest, how much energy does my body need to function. So that basal rate, and that rate actually differs from one person to another person. For instance, I can look at a chocolate and I will pick up 5 kilograms, and then my daughter looks like a skinny stick. She can eat 10 chocolates and nothing will happen. And that is due to the fact that her metabolic rate is much higher than mine. Okay, so she burns at rest a lot more energy. So her basal metabolic rate is much higher than mine. And our body control that basal metabolic rate by the release of thyroxine. So thyroxine is a very important hormone. If it is not secreted at sufficient levels, it can cause a large amount of damage to the body. Okay, then the pituitary gland, the master gland, I have referred to this. The hypophysis, in Afrikaans, I prefer the word hypophysis because in Afrikaans, pituitary is very hard to spell. So most kids spell it wrong, so therefore I prefer hypophysis. Please do not confuse this with the hypothesis. That is not the same thing. The hypothesis is what we get in our scientific investigation. The hypophysis is actually a gland, and it is as small as a little pea, and it produces various different hormones, okay? So the first one is growth hormone, and that controls your growth, but more specifically the growth of your long bones. So your femur, the humerus, all of those long bones, it increases their length, especially during or just before puberty. In boys, it's, I think, the most observable. All of us grow from when very small, but I always remember I had this little guy in grade 8, and when he came to me, he fitted me like halfway between just below my shoulder. And then at the end of grade 9, he was in my register class. He was a head taller than me. So you can actually see that effect of the growth hormone, especially in boys in puberty. Then TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, you can just think where it connects. It connects to the thyroid, and it regulates the release of thyroxine. So the target organ there would then be the thyroid gland. Then the reproductive hormones, we see FSH, LH, and prolactin. Follicle stimulating hormone, target organ is the ovary, and it stimulates the ovary to produce a follicle, a Graafian follicle. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, the target organ is again the ovary, and it stimulates ovulation as well as the development of the corpus luteum from the Graafian follicle, the little section where it was before it burst open. And then prolactin stimulates the mammary glands to secrete milk. It also stimulates breast development, so that there is actually breast milk can be produced after the baby is born. Okay, so what is homeostasis? And I always tell my learners that if I wake you up in the middle of the night, you have to be able to give me this definition from your head. You don't have to think about it. If I ask you what is homeostasis, it's like osmosis. You have to know it off by heart. Okay? It is the control or the maintenance of a constant internal environment. So what is really important here is that word internal environment, because I think a lot of learners think that it has to do with where your heart is or the inside of your body, but it is actually much, much smaller than that. It is on cellular level, the constant internal environment on cellular level, meaning the fluid composition, the pH, the temperature, everything there, I want to keep as constant as possible. I do not want to deviate from the norm. So when I say the word homeostasis, it means that the body is actually managing your fluid level, the cytoplasm inside the cells, and keeping every cell the same. Okay, and that is a hard task. That is actually very, very difficult because your body is continuously doing different processes. If you think your brain is doing something different to your heart, and your heart is doing something different to your intestines. So to maintain a constant internal environment, I have various factors that can change the composition of my cytoplasm. The pH can change, the temperature can change, the water amount of water in the body can change. For instance, if I get dehydrated, I am changing that on a molecular level. I'm changing the cytoplasm composition. So that is what we are trying to achieve by having homeostasis. And during homeostasis, there is the certain part of the brain that is responsible for regulating homeostasis, and that is the hypothalamus. And it uses various different mechanisms, which we call negative feedback mechanisms, to regulate that homeostasis. So what we do have is we have a receptor that then detects a change, okay, and that will go to the control center of the body, which is most probably the hypothalamus, okay. So an imbalance is detected. The control center is then stimulated. So it observes that imbalance and then it will send a message to the effector. Okay, so remember the effector is either a gland or a muscle, but in this case, it will most probably be a gland, okay, because we are busy with the endocrine system. Okay, so now the effector either have to be stimulated or it has to be inhibited. Okay, so that depending on what the deviation was, let's say there's an increase in blood glucose levels, homeostasis is going to take place. So a gland will be stimulated to decrease the blood glucose level back to normal. Okay, so and with that we get this nice little graph where we can see, okay, there was an increase in blood glucose level, insulin was secreted, the blood glucose level come down, and balance is then restored. So if the blood glucose level go to the other way, I have the exact same response. The receptor will detect that the blood glucose level is too low. It will send a message to the pancreas and it will increase glucagon, which will then increase the blood glucose level. So I'll have this up and down movement of blood glucose, but it will keep it in the margins of what is normal, what is acceptable. And that is what we want during homeostasis, is that balance to be obtained or observed so that it doesn't go outside of the factors that is normal, so that we have balance in the body.
Okay, so next up we're going to have a look at different types of negative feedback mechanisms. And the first one that I'm going to take you through is maintaining thyroxine. So as Ms. Boyens mentioned, thyroxine is a hormone that regulates your metabolism. So if the thyroxine level in your blood is not at normal, your body needs to find a way to maintain that balance again. Okay, so I am going to draw you a little picture, what I do with my grade 12s. And this picture just shows you sort of the steps that is needed. So first of all, we have the hypophysis, right, the master gland. And this hypophysis needs to sort of get a message to the thyroid so that the thyroid can release thyroxine. I missed one, thyroxine. Right, so here, this, okay. So the two in red, hypophysis and the thyroid, those are my glands, right. And these two glands, they need to have a conversation with one another to be able to maintain your thyroxine level. So the hypophysis is going to release TSH. TSH is going to stimulate or inhibit the thyroid, and the thyroid will then release thyroxine. So if we have a problem with thyroxine, so for example, there's just too much thyroxine in the blood, you have to start at the top to be able to decrease your thyroxine level. All right, so this is sort of the order, but the problem is at the bottom. So to fix this problem at the bottom, we have to start right at the top. So looking at my steps that we have from the notes, let's say the situation is that there's a high thyroxine level, and this is now specifically in your blood. So there we have the normal. For some other reason, your thyroxine, which is right at the bottom of my drawing, that level increases. Then your pituitary, which is this little pea-sized gland in your brain, the pituitary needs to have a conversation with your thyroid. To do that, it produces less TSH, so that thyroid, which looks like that thyroid will be stimulated a little bit less. When the thyroid is stimulated a little bit less, we will have less thyroxine secreted, and then what we have at the end is we have the thyroxine level decreasing back to normal. Right, so the problem was the thyroxine, but to get the thyroxine levels back to normal, we have to start with the master gland. So the master gland, the pituitary, will be stimulated to produce less TSH, to stimulate the thyroid less, to be able to release less thyroxine, and then balance is restored. Right. Then in an alternative situation, if there's more thyroxine in your blood, I'll come back to that picture in a minute. If there's very little thyroxine in your blood, right, so that's the normal level, and the thyroxine level decreases, again we start right at the top. So the pituitary gland will be stimulated. The pituitary will secrete now more TSH to be able to stimulate the thyroid gland more. And if the thyroid gland is stimulated at a higher level, it will secrete more thyroxine, and then balance is restored. It's quite important that you don't draw a flow diagram in your exams. So if we ask you to explain how low thyroxine levels is maintained by the body, you can't draw a flow diagram with arrows. So this is the steps. This is what we have here on the left. This is what you need to write to be able to get your marks. All right. So quickly, just going back to that picture that we have here. So here we have the two glands, the pituitary gland. In your textbook, you might also call this the hypophysis, like I did. Both are totally accepted. And at the bottom, there's the thyroid gland. And these two glands need to have a conversation with one another. So to do that, the pituitary releases a hormone. So you follow the arrow, and that hormone basically either stimulates the thyroid more, or it stimulates a little bit less, so that the thyroid can release another hormone. So based on this picture, you need to be able to identify the hormones X and Y. Alright, so just following the arrows, X would be the hormone TSH, right? TSH stimulates the thyroid, and then the thyroid will release the hormone thyroxine. Okay, this is actually quite a nice picture that you can, if possible, maybe pause the video and write this down so that you can sort of see the root of the conversation and the message that it follows. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a possible exam question. So here we have a diagram that shows you the hormones involved in the homeostatic control of metabolism. So already you should know the two hormones involved in that, or the only hormone, is thyroxine. So here is a picture of the brain, and they are showing you that pea-sized gland there, and you should be able to identify that as the hypophysis or the pituitary. And then over here at the bottom, there's a gland known as the thyroid. Right, so same two hormones that we had a look at. And another thing that you have to pay attention to is the direction of the arrows. So the arrows are going from left to and right to the thyroid. And then the thyroid, you can see the arrows, they are talking to the hypophysis again. So first question, identify the gland that secretes hormone A. So hormone A, if you follow the arrow, is secreted by the hypophysis, and then that hormone talks to the thyroid. So the hormone, the gland, have a look at what they're actually asking for. The gland would be the hypophysis or the pituitary. Then they are asking for hormone B. So having a look at the arrows, this hormone is released by the thyroid gland. So that hormone has to be thyroxine. They name this mechanism. This mechanism will always be negative feedback. Right, that is your go-to answer with regards to homeostasis and how the balance is maintained. How it's maintained is negative feedback. Next question is quite an interesting one. Let's say half of gland X was removed. What would two possible effects be that this removal will have on the secretion of the hormones? So how will this removal influence hormone A and hormone B? So first of all, if X were to be removed, right, so there we cut down X, that part is now removed, there will obviously be less of B, right? If there's less of the hormone, of less of the gland, there'll be less of hormone B being released. And then if there's less of hormone B, hormone A is going to want to increase that amount. And the only way to increase the amount of hormone B would have to be by increasing the amount of hormone A. Right, so hormone B will be less and there will be more of hormone A. Either way you look at it, if there's less of that gland is going to secrete less. So in return, to be able to negatively, enable this negative feedback, there'll have to be more of A to be able to sort of help the process of there being less of B. Okay, last question for from my side. Explain the consequences. So you see the word explain, so there's a cause and an effect. What would happen if hormone A remained abnormally high for very long periods of time? So hormone A, you first need to identify it. Hormone A is TSH. So if there's a lot of TSH, it is going to stimulate that thyroid a lot, right? And that is going to result in a lot of thyroxine being released. So in essence, they are asking what will happen if there's a lot of thyroxine in a person. So that results in metabolism being much faster and much higher than normal. So their metabolism will be higher, their heart rate will increase, they are going to basically burn the majority of the energy that they eat, and there will be very little energy that will be stored. So therefore this person could be underweight, and that could also lead to anxiety. Right, so I think this is some of the information from your notes that you have to know, sort of what are the effects if metabolism is high and if metabolism is low. So this is the sneaky way of asking what will happen if someone's metabolism will be higher. And then name the disorder when you have a lot of hormone B. So a large amount of thyroxine could lead to a condition known as hyperthyroidism. All right, so now we are moving on to the negative feedback of glucose.
Okay, so when we have glucose is really important to regulate in our body. Firstly, due to the fact that every cell process in our body requires energy, and that energy comes from the process of glucose or cell respiration. So if we run out of glucose, that means that cell respiration cannot take place, and then our body don't have energy. Okay, so that is a major problem. The other side is also true. If we have too much glucose in the body, then we have a problem with osmosis. So then water moves in the wrong direction, okay? And that is also not good. So glucose is actually regulated very, very, very carefully in our body. And it uses two different hormones that speak to each other, okay? Those hormones are both secreted by the pancreas. So the first one is insulin, and the second one is glucagon. Careful for glucagon because it sounds like glucose and it sounds like glycogen, okay? And those three things are not the same. Glucagon has an O in it, and hormone also has an O in it. So glucagon is a hormone, okay? So O and O gaan saam. Okay, O and O goes together. Glycogen is a polysaccharide. That is the storage molecule that we store glucose in our body. Okay, and then glucose obviously is the easiest one to recognize. That is the one that is our energy source, that is produced during photosynthesis, and then we eat it, and then we burn the glucose in the process of cell respiration. So if we go to the regulation of glucose in the body, so for instance, I've just eaten a chocolate, okay, and now in the bloodstream there will be a high level of glucose which the body doesn't want, okay. So now I want to move that glucose from the bloodstream into my body's cells so that the blood glucose level can go back to normal. For that, I will need a hormone that is known as insulin, okay? So to get there, I will have the islets of Langerhans. That is a very big word, but it's small pockets of endocrine glands that we find inside the pancreas. They will be stimulated, okay? And then remember, we have a gland, and now if it's stimulated, a hormone will be released. That hormone that will be released is insulin, okay? So what is insulin's target organ? It's mainly the liver and the muscle cells of the body, okay? And what is it going to do there? Remember that each hormone in our body works like that. It is secreted by a gland, it has a target, and then it's going to do something there. So what is insulin going to do at the liver and the muscle cells? It is going to stimulate those cells to absorb or assimilate, is actually the better word, glucose from the bloodstream into the cells, okay? So it's removing the glucose from the bloodstream into the cells, but the cell only has so much space. So it's going to package those glucose molecules into its polysaccharide form, which is known as glycogen. So it stimulates glucose to turn into glycogen, so it stores the glucose, and it removes it from the bloodstream into the cells. So now I will have a decrease of blood glucose level, and the blood glucose level will go back to normal. Okay, so this is an easy way to, I think in pictures. So I see a little picture of this glucose molecules, a lot of them in the bloodstream, and then I have my little insulin buckets pouring the glucose into the liver cells. Okay, now the liver cell is full, so what do? I package it nice in little presents, which we call glycogen. So that is the effect of insulin. It decreases my blood glucose level. Just an important fact, the pancreas or the islets of Langerhans will never secrete both insulin and glucagon at the same time at high levels, okay? So if insulin is high, that means that glucagon is inhibited. So that means that the glucagon level will be low, okay? Because they have the opposite effect. So what will be the negative feedback mechanism of that? So now I've eaten my hearty breakfast this morning, blood glucose level went up, insulin did its work. Now I'm at school the whole day, and I'm not eating, and I'm practicing rugby, and I'm not eating, and I only get home at 8, 9 o'clock at night and I haven't eaten, then my blood glucose level will most probably go below normal because I'm not taking in any food, okay? So that will decrease the blood glucose level. And what is now going to happen is the islets of Langerhans is going to pick up that there's a change in blood glucose level. So there is my gland. How is my gland going to respond? It is going to increase the level of glucagon that is released. So remember, I just said they cannot be released both at the same time. So if glucagon, the hormone, goes up, insulin will be inhibited, okay? So glucagon is my hormone. It has to have a target organ. So where is it going to go? It is again going to go to the liver. And now it's going to do the exact opposite from from the work that insulin did, okay? So insulin changed glucose to glycogen. So now I'm going to have glycogen going back to glucose, but now it's still inside the cell. That doesn't change my blood glucose level. So I have to release that glucose back into the bloodstream, and that will then increase the level of blood glucose, and then it will go back to normal. Okay, so this is really important. I like to think in diagrams or in pictures. I always see glucagon and insulin as two little mannetjies met emmers. They are little men with buckets, and they are continuously moving glucose. They're either moving the glucose into the cell or they are moving the glucose out of the cell. And they have different, they are like Mario and Luigi. They are not the same. Mario will put the glucose in and Luigi will take it out. Okay, so glucagon will take the glucose from in the cell into the bloodstream, while insulin takes it from the bloodstream into the cell. So they cannot operate at the same time. You cannot have one main player. You cannot have two main players at the same time. So they operate separately, glucagon increasing the blood glucose level and insulin decreasing the blood glucose level. Okay, so let's look at a little picture, or actually a question, but they will most probably give you a diagram or a picture. So first look at the picture. The moment we see the liver, that is our clue that we are busy with glucagon and insulin. Because remember, we are doing various different negative feedback mechanisms, okay? So the first thing that is your responsibility is to be able to identify with what negative feedback mechanism am I working. So if I see the butterfly, I know that it's thyroxine and THH. If I see the liver, I know it's glucagon and insulin. If I see the kidney, I know that it's most probably ADH or aldosterone. So that way I can identify with what negative feedback mechanism I am busy with, okay? So study the following diagram and identify organ 1. So we have the liver there, it's already indicated. So please do not write liver then, because it's already on the diagram. So organ 1, remember the two organs that talked to each other was the pancreas and the liver in this section. So that answer will then be the pancreas. Then identify hormone 2, okay? So hormone 2, hormone 2 is released and it acts on the liver and it decreases the blood glucose level. So you must follow the key. So there's a little dotted line, and there goes a dotted line, and there goes a dotted line. So to follow that, so we start with a high level of glucose, blood glucose, stimulating the pancreas. Hormone 2 is released. The target organ is the liver, and what does it do there? It decreases the blood glucose level. So there's only one hormone that decreases the blood glucose level, and that is insulin. Okay, so what is hormone 3? So let's follow again the little key here. We've got low levels of blood glucose. Pancreas is stimulated. Now the other hormone has to be released, and then that would be glucagon. Okay, talking to the liver and then increasing the blood glucose level. Name the disorder caused when organ 1 fails to release sufficient amount of hormone 2. And there's only one disease that is actually has to do with this negative feedback mechanism, so you don't even have to think very hard about it, just go learn it. The answer would be diabetes mellitus. Okay, people with type 1 diabetes mellitus are usually insulin dependent. They must inject themselves with insulin to control their blood glucose level. During a stressful situation, adrenaline is secreted, which has the same effect as glucagon on the body or on the blood glucose level. An investigation was conducted, and this is where you take out your highlighter and you highlight to determine the influence of adrenaline on the blood glucose levels of type 1 diabetics who were also glucagon deficient. Okay, why am I telling you to highlight the aim of the investigation? Because it tells you what the variables is. Without even going further, I can immediately tell you what is the independent variable and what is the dependent variable, because I know what my aim of my investigation is. Okay, so during this investigation, the following things was done. 100 male patients with type 1 diabetes mellitus who were also glucagon deficient participated in the investigation. They were given the same amount of food and water at the same time for a period of 3 days. Their blood glucose levels were measured on the morning of the 3rd day. A solution with a low concentration of adrenaline was then administered intravenously, and after 20 minutes the blood glucose concentration in each person was measured again, and the blood glucose levels before and after administering adrenaline were compared. Okay, so that is the method that they gave us. Okay, name the gland that secretes glucagon. So remember that the gland is inside the pancreas, so it is the islets of Langerhans. I do see that they are accepting pancreas, but remember that the pancreas is actually an organ. The gland that is secreting the hormone would be the islets of Langerhans, so that would be the more correct answer. Identify the independent variable in this investigation. That's why I said highlight the aim of the investigation, sorry. So if I go back to the aim of the investigation, to determine the influence of adrenaline, okay, and on what? On the blood glucose levels of type 1 diabetes. So what am I going to measure? I'm going to measure the blood glucose levels, so that will make that blood glucose levels the dependent variable. What is causing the change in the blood glucose levels? That will be the amount of adrenaline. Okay, so that is why I like to highlight the aim of the investigation, because then it's easy to identify the dependent and the independent variable. So in this case, the independent variable would be the amount of adrenaline, and if they give you a graph with a unit, you would also add the unit there. In this case, there were no unit given, but I would like to see a unit there if there was a unit given. State 3 other factors that should have been kept constant during the investigation. 3 other factors, and that is where a lot of you make a reading error. If they ask for 3 other factors, it means that it cannot be factors that is already listed here. Okay, so it must be something else that is not listed here. So I cannot say use the same amount of male patients because it's already listed there. Okay, so I have to think of 3 other things that has to be kept constant. So the type of food must be the same. The concentration of adrenaline must be the same. The amount of adrenaline, the measuring tools used, the person measuring the glucose concentrations, the level of activity, the age of the patients, the body mass index of the patient, the health conditions of the patient. So there are 3 other, any 3 would have been marked correctly, and if I'm not mistaken, it would have been only the first 3 answers that were marked. Okay, so if they ask state 3, that means that doesn't matter how many he writes, I will only look at the first 3 answers. Okay. Explain why. Explain means it has to be cause and effect. So explain why the blood glucose levels were measured before injecting adrenaline on the third day. Remember, we wanted to see what the effect of the adrenaline was. So if I don't have a level to compare it with, how can I then measure the effect of the adrenaline? So the measurement beforehand is for us to compare the level afterwards with. Okay, so that is actually my control. Okay, it provides a baseline, a point of reference, a control to compare with the effect of injecting adrenaline. Okay, explain why, again, cause and effect. The adrenaline was injected instead of given orally, and this has to do with time. Okay, so hormones are proteins and therefore will be digested, denaturated, making it ineffective. But also, I would have added there that it takes a longer time. For if you take something orally, the effect of it is going to be longer before it can actually reach the bloodstream. So if it's directly administered, I can immediately see the effect thereof. And adrenaline's effect is actually so short-lived that you might not see it if it's taken orally. Okay. So, or since it enters the blood directly, it will reach the target's organs faster. Okay, so then I can immediately observe the change. Question 3.6. Explain what would be the expected results after adrenaline was injected into the patient. So what am I expecting? What is the effect of adrenaline? And they actually tell us here in the question, they tell us at the top, they say during a stressful situation, adrenaline is secreted, which has the same effect as glucagon on the blood glucose level. So they give us a little key, a little tip there. Okay, so what will be the effect of adrenaline? It will most definitely increase the blood glucose level because it has the same effect as glucagon. So the blood glucose levels will increase because an increase in adrenaline stimulates the conversion of glycogen to glucose. And this is an explained question. That is why it's answered like this: cause and effect. Okay, give a reason for the use of 100 patients in the investigation instead of only 10. Okay, the more the merrier. That means that we are repeating the exercise. So that means that we are working with the 2 R's, reliability and repeat. So that is why we're using more patients. It is more reliable.
Okay, so next up, we are going to look at the negative feedback of water. So with water, your target organ will be the kidneys, and more specifically inside the kidneys, there's a structure known as the nephron, which you don't need to know for grade 12, but you do need to know that those tubules, those convoluted tubules, the water is reabsorbed from there. So I'm going to start by quickly drawing you another picture. So this is what I use with my grade 12s. So I tell them there, for example, is the blood. And then there at the bottom, we have one nice convoluted tubule. Right, so the blood, in this case, it's at the top. And the blood, in the blood, there's a little amount of water. Right, so each one of these little coliques, that is water. And the only way in which water can move into the blood is by moving out of the tubule. Right, and this movement out of the tubule, that is called and you have to remember that reabsorption. Right, so water moves out of the tubule into the blood, and that is called reabsorption. And the only way to do this is these walls can become a little bit more permeable. So I tell my learners it's sort of like opening up doors. So the doors of these tubules can open up, they will become more permeable, and then more water can flow from the tubule into the blood, and we call that reabsorption. Right, so first situation, let's look at it if there's too much water, right? Too much water in the blood. This could be because you drank a lot of water, or you sweated very little, or the temperature is just very cold to allow you to not sweat a lot, so you're not losing a lot of water. So that is detected by osmoreceptors, and that's in your hypothalamus, and they are going to tell your master gland, listen, there's too much water in the blood, we need to sort of help the situation, and the only way to do that is by releasing less ADH. Right, so the ADH is going to make those walls of the tubules less permeable, so closing up the doors of the tubule, and that means less water is reabsorbed, and that means that there's more water staying in the tubule, which will form urine. Right, so quickly have a look back at my drawing. So let's say there's now, in this situation, a lot of water in the blood, right? There's a lot of water. We don't want more water to be added into the blood, right? The water can't move out of the blood. The water can only be reabsorbed by moving into the blood. So the only way to help this is so that your body releases less ADH. And if there's less ADH, it makes these walls less permeable. Right. And if they are less permeable, there's less reabsorption. Okay. And when we have this opposite effect, everything is then just in reverse. So then if there's very little water up there, then we would like more water to move out of the tubule. Right, so little water up there, you are dehydrated. The only way to solve the dehydration is to move more water into the bloodstream. So therefore there will be more ADH. That will make the tubules more permeable, and that will make more water to be reabsorbed. So quickly having a look here at the opposite effect. If there's too little water in the tubules, osmoreceptors still detects this. The pituitary will now secrete more ADH, which will make my distal convoluted tubules more permeable. So I'm opening up the doors, and that is going to allow for more water to be reabsorbed, and therefore the water balance is restored. So there's then less water being left in the tubule, so therefore the urine will be more concentrated, or there'll even just be less urine that will be formed. Right, so I just have a quick question for you, and then we're going to end our session. So here we have a diagram that shows you negative feedback when a person is dehydrated. So this has to do with water. Hormone X, so the only hormone that regulates water is ADH. The gland that secretes this hormone is the hypophysis, or you could have also mentioned the pituitary, and then my target organ would be the kidneys. And whenever they ask me to describe this negative feedback, you just refer to your notes, and that would be sort of a long question explaining how the water is reabsorbed and which hormone will be released more. Right, so grade 12s, that is going to be all for the day. I hope that you have learned a lot, and I hope that all your questions are answered.
Yes, I hope you had a wonderful time with us this afternoon. Sorry, I've got a little bit of laryngitis, so I think my hour of talking is now done. But I hope you have a lovely afternoon, and we see you next time.
Right, goodbye.